Bournemouth University logo and the text Athena Swan are shown on screen, followed by the text Our Pathway to Athena Gold, a perspective from the Department of Biology of York. Professor Jane Hill, Department of Biology, University of York. Text on screen reads, this video is part of the Equality and Diversity outreach work being undertaken at BU 2014-2015. The screen is laid out with a video of the speaker on the left hand side above the Bournemouth University and Athena Swan member logos. On the right hand side is the speaker's presentation. Slide 1 reads, University of York, Our Pathway to Athena Swan Gold, a perspective from biology at York. Professor Jane K. Hill, AS Champion, Department of Biology, jane.hill@york.ac.uk.
So thank you very much for inviting me. I do quite like talking about this. It's something that I've been involved with for quite a while, and with the sort of perspective of wanting to improve practice and to disseminate good practice and good ideas, I'm really keen to do this, and I've also really benefited from people coming to York to do something similar, and with a sort of spirit of being open and discussing what works and what doesn't in a way of trying to get things getting things better for all, if you like. So what I would say is that this is my personal opinion of things that I think worked at York. And I guess one of the things that we've sort of discovered from talking to other institutions is that every institution is different in its own special way and has different stresses, different challenges, and perhaps has different ways of working, which might be to do with the way in which the university is set up. It might be something to do with the way it's managed that means that things operate in a different way. Or it may just be something more to do with the different challenges that come about because of different students and staff and activities that you do. So this is essentially what we do at York, and whether it's good for other universities or other departments or whatever, I don't know, just find out through discussion. So the first thing I would say is that we've been on this path for a very long time. So the one thing I think for everybody to appreciate is that it took us a long time to get to gold. It's not something that happens very quickly. So when I arrived in York in 2001, there was clearly already interest in issues to do with gender, and that had been, I think that was probably due to certain specific people within the university wanting to engage with the process. And then in 2006, when applying for Athena Swan was a fairly straightforward thing to do, I think it's just two sides of text where you could choose whether you wanted to include data or not. It was sort of up to you. Biology at York got a silver at that point. So from 2006 up until 2014, when we got our gold, we had been doing a lot of different things and starting from quite a good place, but it has been a long trip, if you like. And we did try for gold before we were successful, so that's the other thing. Like a lot of other departments, if they're at a bronze, they're trying for silver, and if they're silver, they're trying to get to a gold. So I suppose what I would say is it's taken us a long time and we weren't successful. It took us a few goes to get to gold. So as you'll see at the very end, one of the things I think is quite important is about continuing to make progress, because clearly we're not only doing all of this just to get an award, although that's a nice prize at the end of it. We are wanting to do this so that we have better working conditions for all. So my role in the department, I'm an ecologist, so I've been at the University of York for most of my professional life. I got my first lectureship there and have been promoted and now have a chair. So I've seen quite a lot of the good practices that have been in place, and perhaps I may have benefited from some of those. But my perspective as a lecturer is all from York. I have other experiences from being postdocs and an undergraduate elsewhere. I have several roles in the department, but my main admin role is to be the Athena Swan champion. So I was responsible for putting in our gold applications, for getting our silver renewal, and then subsequently for getting our successful gold. I still call myself the Athena Swan champion, but I've now morphed into an equality and diversity champion, as we're all moving away directly from Athena and women's science much more into equality and diversity, recognising what the ECU is doing. So that's only just happened, so I'm still not quite aware of how my role is changing, and maybe that's something we could discuss, because clearly everybody's going through that process and no one's quite clear about how these things will change. So that's just who I am and what we've been doing.
The slide changes and shows the title Department of Biology with the text Bad Working Practices Detrimentally Affect Women. Good Working Practices Benefit All. The Athena Swan Gold Award logo is shown and there is an image of everyone from the Department of Biology. The speaker explains the image.
So this is the Department of Biology at York. So this is who we are. That's not the university. That's on one of our research away days. So that we don't have nice buildings like that. And most of what we've done, and this is what I think is perhaps unique to us, and I don't think other departments have done this, is essentially our philosophy is about bad working practices detrimentally affecting women, but good practices are good for all. So everything we do is inclusive. So we have managed to get gold without doing any particular activity that is only for women. So we haven't badged anything as a woman's activity. And I don't know whether that was the right thing to do. I don't know, I know other places do it differently. I also know that the university does it differently. So for instance, we have a women's forum at the university, which clearly is for women only. But within the department, we have never done anything for women. We've just looked at activities and felt that they were bad practices and therefore they needed to be improved. So I'm not saying that that's what everybody should be doing. I'm just saying that if you want to think about how we've approached it at York, that's always been our philosophy. And I know some people might think that probably is not going to be effective. They might think that we should be targeting specific activities to women maybe. But one thing I would say is that we've managed to keep all of the staff on board, more or less, as a consequence. So maybe people will come and say it to me, but I rarely hear people who think that Athena Swan is a bad thing, either men or women, either feeling that they're being patronised or feeling that there's activities happening that they just don't support. And I don't know how much of it is because we tell everybody this is our philosophy, and therefore they shouldn't expect to see women's things happening, or not. But that's just how we run everything. So whenever we want to make a change, we just play it out for everybody and just say everybody is going to benefit because this was a bad way of doing it in the past, and now we think it is a much better way of doing it in the future. But of course all of our data analysis and all of the actions that we take are all looking at things from a gender perspective. So we do know situations where men or women are disproportionately affected, and those are the things that we're picking up to improve upon. So of course we are looking at gender.
The slide changes with the title Gold Award in 2014. It shows an image of Jane Hill, Professor Dame Julia Higgins and Nina Pirazek holding the Athena Swan Gold Award. Further text reads, AS Award Ceremony, University of Durham, July 2014.
So this is myself and Nina Pirazek on the right there. So Nina is our biology HR manager. So all of our Athena activities in the department are co-run by academics and by HR. So there are quite a few things where HR needs to be involved to actually roll out activities, but we also have a lot of academic input, so we make sure that all of the things that people want to do are of benefit to academics as well. So it's very much a joint run thing. So say both Nina and I work quite closely together to roll out our activities. So this is us looking so pleased, you can believe what we've been through. We've eventually managed to get it, and that's Julia Higgins, who hands out the awards and was the person who set up the Athena Forum originally.
The slide shows a graph with the title Where We Are Currently, percentage of females at different career stages in biology at York. The graph reads Representation of females at different career stages, with the mean percentage of female over 6 years from 2008 to 2013, and the job titles along the bottom. Undergraduates come in at 60%, postgraduate taught 50%, postgraduate research 50%, grade 6 researcher 55%, grade 7 researcher 45%, lecturer 30%, senior lecturer reader 20%, and professor at 30%. The speaker explains the graph.
Okay. So I haven't put too many data in here, but I just thought that this would be a useful point to start with, because clearly collecting the data and reflecting on the data is a huge part of what we do. And over the years, we've gradually been collecting more and more data, and we've been having more and more discussions around the data as we collect it. So part of the reason I think that the Athena journey takes such a long time is that the actual process of collecting information is clearly a big job, but also the discussion around that, about what it's showing you and what are the particular challenges for your department or your institute, takes a long time. It takes a lot of consultation with staff and decisions about what you might wish to do about it. So this is taken from our gold application, which went in 2013. So it's a couple of years out of date, but not hugely. So this is this is what they call about. This is the leaky pipeline that they talk about. So for a biology department, for undergraduates, we're fairly typical. It's actually come down a little bit. We've introduced some a new degree programme in biomedical sciences, and we're also starting a new degree programme in natural sciences. So we're keeping an eye on this to see whether that 60% starts to drop or not. But this is about where most biology departments are. Yeah. So what's changed here recently? So these are quite small numbers, and so what's happened recently is this has swapped, and quite a few of our lecturers now have become promoted to senior lecturer, and we've actually now got a dearth of female lecturers because we've promoted but not recruited. Overall, we're just under 30% female overall across all of the academics, and that makes us slightly above the Russell. We compare ourselves with the Russell group. That makes us above the Russell group. So we've spent quite a lot of our time focusing on this transition, which is so these are the postdocs and the senior researchers, and these are the permanent, if you like, lecturers. So it's this transition that we've been most interested in, and what we've been told does make us quite unique at York is the fact that this is relatively flat. So we don't seem to have the continued, as I say, these numbers are a bit small, but we don't seem to have the continued reduction down to a professorial level. So what we conclude at York Biology is once you're in, you're okay if you're a woman, but getting in the first place is what's hard. And it's not as though we're recruiting women in as lecturers and they're never being promoted, which I think is what you're seeing in some other institutes. So although we have, as I'll show you, we have spent quite a lot of time looking at our promotions procedures, we've been focusing quite a lot at this recruitment into the lectureship, because we think that that's where most of the issues are. So the other thing that we've also talked about quite a lot as a department is where would we wish to be? And that's quite an interesting discussion to have, and it's not being resolved. So if somebody could sort of wave their magic wand, what would this graph look like if everything was completely fair? And most people don't think that it would be 50% across the board. And that might be an interesting discussion to have. I think in the department we don't think that probably would be the case. And this is sort of getting people into thinking about quotas and things like that. That's the sort of where that discussion starts to go. So if it was all completely free and everything was completely fair, what would the graph look like? Would it actually look like 60% across the board because that's what's coming in at undergraduate level? Or do you not actually peg it at your undergraduates because perhaps you would expect your undergraduates to be 50-50? Perhaps we should be turning female students away. Do you see? I mean, that's a sort of interesting discussion to be had about all of this, because I think if you were in if you saw this graph for the chemistry department at York, who is also a gold award, then they have a much flatter set of histograms showing far less of a leaky pipeline, but everything's pegged at about 25%. and they put a lot of effort into getting more female undergraduates coming in because it's a male-dominated all across the board. So anyway, so it's quite that's an interesting sort of discussion to have, because that's part about I think that's what Athena wants us to be thinking about. Where would you be if everything was fantastic? And where are you hoping to be as you're putting in all of your new ideas, so that if you have a target and a goal, you'll know when you've got there.
A new slide is shown with the title Issues to Tackle. Overall gender priority in appointments, but only 30% of applicants are female. Graph title reads Academic Recruitment. It shows the percentage of female applications and female interviews, with a total number of appointments. In 2008, 31% applied, 29% got interviews, 2 people got the job. In 2009, 24% applied, 8% got to interviews, 1 person got a job. 2010, 34% applied, 60% got to interviews, and 1 person got a job. 2011, 48% applied, 25% got to interview, and 1 person got the job. 2012, 26% applied, 36% got to interview, and 2 people got the job. 2013, 28% applied, 36% got to interview, and 3 people got the job.
Okay, so there's a bit of this again is taken from the sort of data that Athena asks for. So this is looking at who applies. So this is the question you just asked. What is the proportion of your applicants that are female? What proportion of your applicants do you actually interview? And then how many do you appoint? And as you can see here, the numbers are of course really, really small. We haven't. We're sort of over this time. We're sort of, as you can see, appointing about 2 people, 1 or 2 people a year. So we're not really expanding, but there have been some new degrees that we're offering. So there's a bit of expansion here, but mostly turnover. But there's very few opportunities when you can actually really change very much, because it's such a there's so few appointments being made. But the sorts of things that we're looking at here is the question that you said about why so few women apply. So the numbers, we would be expecting, if the people who are applying are essentially the postdocs, for which we've got 50% more or less, why isn't the number of women applying for academic places about 50%? So all of these pale green bars should really be 50%, I think. So they're already getting a bit low. So in this case, in 2008, 30% of the applicants were female, and just under 30% were interviewed, and we ended up with 2 appointments, of which 1 was a woman. That's how you read those. So what the sorts of things that's quite interesting is that there isn't really a pattern between percentage applying and being interviewed. The university thinks that women are more likely to be interviewed, and they think that that's an indication that women are applying at a much later stage, being less risk averse in terms of applications. So it's just sort of jumping around quite a bit there. But we have spent a lot of effort thinking about how to make adverts and the application process more family friendly, I think would be the way of putting it. So really making our logo for the Athena Swan very evident, and all of our practices that we think are family friendly very evident. But we haven't really solved the problem about how you get more women to apply, and I think lots of places are trying to address this issue, because lots of places have picked up that you can only appoint women if they apply, and if they're not applying, then you're already got a reduced number of cohort there. Yeah, but anyway, these are the sorts of things that we mull over and look at a lot, and talk with our university HR about ways of making the recruitment process better. And we brought in, I'll talk about it at the end actually, because we brought in a few different ways of recruiting, which we think is probably quite a good practice, which I'll talk about.
New slide shows title Some Progress. The increase in number of female academics over time, and higher percentage of female academics than the UK average. It shows the years 2008 to 2014, with the percentage of female lecturers, percentage of female senior lecturers, and percentage of female professors. This data starts out quite even in 2008 at around 25% and ends in 2014, with 20% being female lecturers, 32% being female senior lecturers and 30% being female professors. The speaker describes the data. She also references a Russell group with around 22%.
In a moment. Anyway, so these are the more up-to-date data. So these are different to what's in our gold application. And this is what I was mentioning. So now we're going back to looking at female staff by grade, but this time over the different years. So this is degrading the data and splitting it. So this is our Russell group that we compare against. And as you can see, it sort of started off quite well in 2008 with nice even lecturers, senior lecturers, readers and professors. And then when we got our gold, it was back to that sort of position again. And as I say now, we've sort of got a disparity. And some of this is to do with people arriving and leaving, some of it is to do with people being promoted. And it's a whole mixture of things. But we're keeping an eye on this because we've appointed quite a lot of male lecturers recently. So not that many, but they just doesn't take long for it to change to a slightly different pattern. And then we've got promotions going through, but not replacing women coming through.
The black line starts around 48% in 2008 and rises to around 55% in 2014.
And as you can see, the black line along the top is just the total number of staff, so a slight increase in the number of staff overall. So we keep a good look at this all of the time, and this is really where we want. This is the sort of pattern that we want to see, where we want to see equal no drop off across the different grades, but of course we'd like to see it above 30%. That's the sorts of things we want to do. But we did see between 2008 and 2014 there has been a slight increase in the proportion of female lecturers overall. We've gone from 25% to nearly 29%. So slowly heading in the right direction, but very, very slowly.
New slide with the title reads, How did we get gold? With the bullet points, Enhanced female representation in the department. Female professors increased from 5 to 7, female lecturers from 3 to 7 during our silver period. Embedded Athena Swan principle in the department. Dedicated resource, budget, larger SAT, TORS, website, better data collection and analysis. Improved promotions process. Proactive HOD and RC chair look over CVs. Instigated and sabbatical system for academics. 1 term off in 9, return from period of leave. New workload models for academics. Information on teaching loads available for all to see. Mechanism to equalise loads.
So I sort of had a bit of a think about why I thought we'd got gold, because it is a bit difficult. It's a sort of very difficult to pin down some of these awards. You know, what do you actually have to do to get bronze? What do you have to do to get silver? They're not too bad. They're quite the sort of rules, if you like, are reasonably clearly laid out for those. And then you sort of think, what do you have to do to be gold? We were quite short, so I tried to reflect what it was that I thought we'd done that made us unique. So one of the things I did think, even though it was a slight increase, the fact that we did increase the female representation in the department, I think that must have helped us, even if it was only by a very small amount. So we've increased the number of female professors we've got. We recruited some, we lost some, and we also promoted some. So there was a mixture of reasons why the number increased. And over the silver period, so that was up to 2013, we had increased the number of female lecturers. But as I say, that number has now changed because some of those lecturers have now gone to become senior lecturers. So those numbers are a bit different. Anyway, you see, you can fiddle around with those numbers forever, and there's always something going on that's quite interesting. Embedding the Athena principles into the department, that took ever such a long time to do. And one of the reasons why I think we were quite successful is that the department has dedicated resource to this. So that's actual money, and I always think unless there's real money involved, it means that the department doesn't really support something. So the evidence of how much what you're doing is supported by the university and the department, I always look into the money, and there is some money for this, so that's a good thing. And we also have part-time use of one of our departmental administrators to help us with it. And that's really important because they do a lot of the day-to-day collecting of information and organising meetings, writing up minutes and so on and so forth. The SAT is the self-assessment team. We increased that over the years on advice. We used to have quite a small group of people that were really dedicated and had volunteered to do Athena Swan, which was great. But we decided we don't run any other meetings like that. We don't just get a small group of people who'd like to come along to a teaching meeting to run all of our teaching. So why would we do Athena like that? So we now have a much larger group of people who are there because of the roles they hold in other parts of the department. We have terms of reference for why they're there. So you're there because of the other role you have, not just because you're really enthused about Athena Swan activities. And that means that not only do we get greater influence throughout the department, you can also ask for specific people to do things, and it's their responsibility to do things, rather than relying on a few people who are just enthusiastic but a little bit too busy to do anything. So it's now run just like any other committee in the department would run. We also built a website, and I know that sounds really trivial, but with all of these things, it's just getting them done and getting them populated and keeping them up to date. And we also, because of the way in which we were driving the Athena process from the biology department, we were chivying the university to get their data records into the state that we could use. And I think by being one of the first departments to need these data, we were always having to go and tell them to improve their processes to get the data. And of course all the departments that are coming on behind us now, they just have all the data available for them because the central data repositories now know that this is what we need. So when we first started to do Athena, things like student records weren't all centralised. Things like the HR recruitment software wasn't doing what we wanted and has subsequently been changed. The ways in which all of the staff data was centrally held is now easily, it's easy for us to query and to get the data. When we first started, we had to do this all by sort of phoning people up and just finding paper records of stuff. So things have improved. Yeah. So we go to Athena Network meetings fairly regularly. So we have a northern network that was arranged a few years ago at a time when lots of groups were trying to get together and working out the best way of sharing information. And everybody felt that they didn't want to go to London to meet up because ECU used to organise them in London. So we now have a northern one, which is essentially the M62 up to Newcastle, meet up somewhere along the M62 or A1. So we have to pay to go to those meetings. So what do we do? Yeah, so at one of the meetings I went to, I discovered that our promotions process in the biology department was pretty ropey. This was separate from the promotions criteria that the university set out. So of course we don't set the criteria, they're set by the university. Our actual process, I realised, was not very good. And I talked to other universities and realised that they were operating in a way that was considered much better from an HR perspective. We just didn't know about it. So what we had done was that actually if you talk to most staff, they thought there was a black art to getting promoted where somehow you had to apply several times and then if the mood was right then you were lucky on the third occasion, and it was all a bit weird, and that even if you had read the promotions criteria on the university website, that clearly wasn't it, because it was all down to whether you just got a large grant or not, or I don't know, there was lots of things going around, and also people feeling that they would be told when it was the right time for them to apply, and that somehow they would wait until that had happened. Anyway, so there was lots of confusion. And what I realised from talking elsewhere was that actually what most other places were running was the expectation that you went in for promotion every year, and that was the norm, and that you would withdraw yourself from the promotion process under a number of reasons that you might choose not to go ahead. Whereas what we were doing was that very few people were going for promotion in any 1 year, rather than large numbers of people going for promotion. So we've changed that. And now we're much more proactive about encouraging people to go forward, and that it's built in now to our performance management process. So every year at our performance review, the question is about whether or not we're going to go for promotion, and a discussion about that. And then the head of department and the chair of the research committee then look over those documents to see who they might choose to encourage to go forward if they didn't go forward themselves. So there's a mixture of expecting people to go forward more often and also making sure that those people who are ready to go forward are really encouraged to go forward. And then there's help with sort of lunchtime sessions and providing with a mentor if people find that would be helpful. So I won't show you the data, but we've continued to be successful, but we've had many more people going forward for promotion, which sort of implied to us that we had quite a lot of people who were ready for promotion but hadn't gone forward because of our old processes. And what I would say is that it's a huge amount of work, and we're struggling with how we deal with that, especially the head of department wants to know how they can run it better, because it is a huge amount of work. Not only talking to people, but also writing the supportive documentation for promotion is a huge amount of work. So we're continuing to think about this so that we can, in a way that is appropriate, try and distribute some of this effort across other senior members of the department. We didn't have a sabbatical process, we now do. And that was relatively easy to do. I thought it was going to be a nightmare to organise, but it was really quite straightforward. The staff either said, we are very supportive of this, or said, I'm not really interested, I won't take part in it, but I don't mind if you would like to organise it, because it's not going to affect me. There are a few people who just said, I think the organisation of it is going to be quite difficult, and so therefore I'm not really interested. But most people just thought it was a great idea. And we have this expectation that you'll have a term off every 9 terms, and that you will particularly have a sabbatical if you return from an extended period of leave through sickness or from maternity leave. So that's been very easy to do. And we also used it during our ref, the run-up to the ref as well. So it was quite a good flexible thing that people who needed some time to for whatever it would be, whether it was to write a paper, whether it was to do some research, whether it was to go away, or just stay in York, or whatever it was, people felt that was a really good thing to do. The rhythm of the year in York happens a long time before the teaching. So you have to have put in your application for a sabbatical about a year before the year in which you wish to take your sabbatical, because that's the time when the timetables are being agreed. And so at the point at which the timetable has to have a different member of staff associated with it is at the time when you're thinking about your teaching for the following year. So it's between a year and 18 months before you choose to take the sabbatical that you fill in the form requesting the sabbatical, for which it's a very short form, but you just have to say what you're going to do and why you wish to have the sabbatical. And then within that you list all of your activities that you will do, and then how they will be covered. You make your suggestion as to who might do your teaching, what you're going to do about your PhD students, what you're going to do about your research lab, and so on and so forth. And then there's plenty of time to discuss what the arrangements might be. And one of the things we haven't done yet, but I just wonder, a bit sort of like babysitting points, you could sort of get points that you would gain from covering somebody else's sabbatical, that you would then use to trade in when you got your sabbatical. Yeah, so you rely on the goodwill of your colleagues to cover for you, but the idea is that you do that quite happily, because in 9 terms' time you will be doing the same, and you will require your staff. So it has to have the support of staff. And that's where, as I say, those staff who say, I don't want to get involved, they just say, I'm never going to take a sabbatical, and I'm not going to cover for anybody else. And as long as you don't have too many people like that, you can deal with that. And what we have done is that if you came back, say, from maternity leave, the expectation would be you would straight away go on a sabbatical. I mean, not if you don't want to, obviously, but most people would be quite happy with that. And we've got a new workload model. Anyway, that'll carry on. That's going to carry on evolving over time. But it used to just be an Excel spreadsheet, and now it's a little bit more sophisticated than that. But we've always had a complete transparency about workload. So everybody, this is primarily teaching, so everybody can see how much teaching everybody else is doing. So we have spreadsheets with everybody's names and everybody's activities, so that we've always been quite transparent about that at York. And everybody is very happy with how we do that, but there's lots of discussions about how you actually tot up hours for particular activities. We try to stay away from the marking. What we do is tot up the number of hours that your name is against on the central timetable. And that includes, and that is weighted differently for first year, second year and third year, reflecting that your first year is easier to deal with but is a larger number, whereas your final year is a smaller cohort but requires a lot more input because of the level of teaching that we're doing. So there is so you get more credit for teaching a third year module than you would for a first year module. It also has things about being on postgraduate training panels, and it also has how many PhD students you have as well. It doesn't cover how many scripts cross your desk, because nobody could decide on so if you marked a first year module with 200 scripts that you just had to put a yes no on, how would you separate that from 30 essays that were each of almost a dissertation that was going to take you nearly an hour to do each essay? So we gave up on that discussion. So that we're moving towards what else should go on there. And I know some universities have a complete breakdown of how many papers you've written that year, how much money you've brought in, how many outreach activities you've done, all of those things. We've not gone there yet, but we could do.
New slide shows an image of their website.
And there's our website. We need somebody to keep it updated. So we keep on. We manage to put something up here every week of somebody in the department who's female doing something. We have all of our documents that can be downloaded, and I'll show you some of the documents and the analysis we do. We also have our case studies and some various other bits of information.
New slide shows the title Culture Surveys with images of the actual survey on a web browser. Text reads, surveys provide honest feedback about how staff and students view the department and ideas for new actions. Currently surveyed staff, second year undergrads and PhDs will repeat these in due course.
So what have we done? We spent quite a lot of time surveying people. So we got some questions from the WISE website and just used those. So this is what you would call a culture survey. I don't know if you've done this. This is basically the only way that you really find out what your staff are thinking. So we've surveyed our second year students 3 years ago, our staff 2 years ago, and we've just surveyed our PhD students. So we essentially asked them the same questions. So we want to find out how they perceive the department. The university, of course, is also running their own surveys at this time, and the students are getting surveyed as well. So we try not to bombard them too much, and we let them know that this is specifically for the biology department, and that we badge this survey very much that we're wanting to find out about them. So we get quite good response rate. We did bribe them with free biscuits. So we got quite good response. Worked quite well for staff as well, so that was all okay. And then we use these to inform our decisions. So, for instance, it does tell us some slightly worrying things about those members of staff and students who say that they've been bullied or they've experienced times when they felt uncomfortable because of their gender, and those sorts of things that most of us perhaps weren't aware of. Allow us to then quantify and then think about how we're going to deal with it. It also raised some quite interesting differences between male and female students about their attitude to their university and their career, which we hadn't quite appreciated, and it was evident that even second year female students had already decided that a biology career was not for them, which was quite interesting. So it started to explain why there was this drop off at quite an early stage, because they'd already perceived that they didn't want to become academics, which was quite interesting. So we do quite a lot of this. I don't use SurveyMonkey anymore. Because we have undergraduate students who are much more savvy with this sort of thing on our Athena Swan team. They've set this up in Google Forms, and they told me it's very easy to do. And so they just take the questions and just run it in Google Forms. You don't have to pay, and it's all there in an Excel spreadsheet for analysis, so it's very straightforward to do. And our idea is that we're going to be regularly, perhaps every 2 or 3 years, repeating these surveys, hopefully to find improvements. Because one of the things that Athena Swan asks you for is evidence of improvement. And unless you quantify things, it's very difficult to show that things have improved. And so that's part of the reason why we do this.
New slide reads, Gender audit of our external profile, with the text, regular audit of departmental literature, notice boards and website to ensure positive images of men and women, and gender parity, with an image of the University of York Department of Biology website.
So one of the things we do a lot, which is what we call a gender audit. So we have lots of people looking out to make sure that everything we do has positive images on women, for women. In fact, in some point, somebody pointed out to me recently that we think we've perhaps gone a little bit too far, and it was difficult to find a male undergraduate student in some of our documentation. So we've realised that we need to have a complete gender audit. In other words, not just looking for positive images of women, but to make sure it's 50-50. And by that we mean we have people, the more people who are involved with spotting this sort of thing when it goes wrong, the better. So you can't just leave it up to one person, but we do that quite a lot just to make sure there are always lots of...
New slide reads, additional data analysis by gender, with the bullet points, research grants, similar success rates ? UCAS tariff versus final undergraduate degree ? Similar chance of first class degree ? REF, equally likely to be returned. Pay gap analysis, similar pay ? Teaching feedback scores, valued similarly by students ? And age at promotion, longer in previous grades ? There is also a graph on the slide that shows the pay gap. This is explained by the speaker.
Positive images. So we've done lots of additional data analyses over and beyond what Athena asks us for. And this is to, again, pick up new initiatives. And I think this perhaps is also what got us gold, is that we were going way beyond what was being asked for. So what sorts of things do we check? Well, we look to see whether there's equal, the number of females putting in for grants is what you'd expect given the proportion of women academics, and whether they're equally, and whether they are as successful as they should be for the proportion of grants they're putting in. We were worried that we had more female students getting first-class degrees and more males getting third-class degrees, so we wanted to check that our teaching was fair to both male and female students. Of course, we looked to see whether our ref return in terms of gender was what you would expect for the females in the department. Recently, the university provided me with data so I could look at a pay gap analysis. So that's our pay gap analysis, which I did last month and then have shown to staff so that they can think about why that may be. So if this is everything from professor down to support staff, and box in grey is where I found some ECU benchmarking data. So if the bar is above the line, men get paid more, and if it's below the line, women get paid more. And we would have no reason, I think, from the outset to expect there to be any deviation between men and women because of the spine points and so on. I also did analysis of age at promotion. I got those data as well to see whether you were older when you got promoted or you spent longer in your previous grade before you got promoted, those sorts of things. And then if there is any evidence of that, then you can target that in terms of things about promotions. And this was an interesting one. Do our students value our male and female lecturers equally? And what I'm trying to do at the moment is get our feedback forms changed so I can find out whether male and female students feedback equally and are equally positive. But there are lots of things like this where the information is not recorded by gender, so you need to get it changed by gender and then collect the data and then find out what's going on. So one of the things we're going to do with this pay gap data is have a discussion about where these differences might come from.
New slide reads, how will we keep gold? New revised action plan focused on 5 themes. Departmental staff and students recognise benefits from our Athena Swan activities, address loss of women at key career stages, supporting career development, departmental organisation and beacon activities. And also with an image of women in a lab. Images from our web main page showing positive female images.
Okay, so this is how we're going to keep gold. So we've got lots of things, more things that we're going to do. And some of these we've got targets for, and some of these are aspirational, and some of these we've got particular activities that we'll keep a check on, so that we know whether we're heading in the right direction or not. Somebody gave me the analogy of Sisyphus pushing a big rock up a hill, and if you don't keep on pushing, it rolls back, and I think that's quite a good analogy. So there's lots of things where you just can't stop doing things, because otherwise you just go back to your old ways.
Slide changes, content is read by the speaker.
So the sorts of things that we're going to do is carry on doing much more with Athena to the department. So for instance, it becomes a standing item on our termly academic staff meetings, and I now have this thing where I have a statistic of the day where I go along to the meeting every term and I say, here's some more statistics with a gender initiative for people to talk about, just to keep raising the profile and just getting people to think about where gender may be an issue in everything that we do. So the sorts of things where this becomes important is, for instance, I was really pleased when I received an email from somebody who was organising our prestigious Biology Open lectures, asking for names of people to come and lecture, and at the bottom of the email it said, please don't forget that we need to get lots of women coming as well as men. So I just thought, great, because they've already said, don't just send all the names of the male colleagues that you know, but do it. And I thought that was good, and we do make sure that our seminar speakers are 50-50 men and women. And again, that was an interesting discussion to have. Should it be 50-50 or not? But anyway, that's where we went.
Slide changes, content is read by the speaker.
So we've done quite a lot about addressing women at key career stages. So I think everybody now is doing unconscious bias training. We make sure that we always have a reasonable gender balance on all interview panels. So, and that includes for postdoc and for PhD interviews as well. We've trained up some of our postdocs, so we can have some postdocs sitting in on those if we're short of one of the genders. We had a discussion about what we do if we get a single gender shortlist. And the last time I happened to be on an appointment, we ended up with a single gender shortlist. Somebody on the panel said, you do realise that this has now become a single gender shortlist, do you? And nobody had. So we said, okay, right, let's go to the gender that's not represented and find the best one and compare that against the worst one on our shortlist. And we did that, and we swapped. And everybody was very happy with that. And when I went round afterwards and asked about, nobody said that person was only invited to make up the numbers, weren't they? Nobody spotted it, because I sort of said, do you think any of these candidates was particularly weak? And nobody said that at all, which showed perhaps that we weren't very good at drawing up our shortlist. And we do lots of mentoring, but the university has also started doing lots of coaching as well, so we make sure that we don't overlap with what the university is offering. We don't want to be doing too much of the same thing.
Slide changes, content is read by the speaker.
What else have we done? Thinking much more about our department and how we organise and our culture. So we're wanting to build up a group of biology, northern biologists who talk much more about issues to do with biology. I think it's good to talk across different science subjects, and also, of course, to widen it into the non-STEM subjects. But I think there are very specific issues to do with biology that it would be very good to talk with other people about. So one of the things I'm quite interested in as a biologist who's an ecologist who does field work is issues to do with safety of women working in the field. And that's something, I don't know if people read around it, but that's something that's been picked up quite a lot. There's quite a lot of discussion about it at the moment. And of course, if you're a woman in the field who feels vulnerable doing field work, perhaps away from the UK in a tropical environment, where a lot of my students go, then that might be enough to put you off if there was some awful experience where you felt vulnerable in the field. And like a lot of places, we're thinking about compiling a history of female scientists in the department to raise the profile. In fact, that might be the first thing we do that's just female, maybe. Anyway. Okay, so.
Slide reads Progress, Department of Biology. Shows an 11% female in 1963, rising to around 30% in 2015.
That's where we've got to in 50 years. So it's really slow. I don't know if anybody who's heard Paul Walton from the chemistry department talk, and he also shows how slow this is. So how many decades it's going to take to get to some sort of quality. So about 3 times increase over 50 years. So it's really, really, really slow. But anyway, that's the sort of progress that we've made.
Slide shows the title High Visibility of Women in the Department. It shows the following roles are held by women: Associate HOD, HR Manager, Finance Advisor, Chair of Research Committee, Chair of Graduate School and Director of Infrastructure and Facilities.
But when I look around the department, it is quite interesting to see that we do have, because we have this 30% of our academics are females. We've got females in quite senior positions as well. So that's just to show that we have a banner as well, the picture on the right, as you do. And on the left is our notice board that you get when you come into our department to see who are the people in the department. So top left is Ian Graham, our head of department, and then these are the key managerial positions within the department. And I've just highlighted which ones of those are women, and there's about half of them that are. So I think we're quite unusual to have our Director of Infrastructure to be female. It's quite an unusual one to be female, I think. And perhaps also Finance Advisor maybe is quite unusual to be female. And then of course very often what you do see is that women have senior roles, but very often they're in, don't mean to be rude about this, but they're not in the really proper committees, if you like, not the ones that hold real power. But clearly the Research Committee does, so we have a female chair of that and also our chair of our graduate school. So it's not just that they're taking up some of the more soft roles, if you like. So I think that's a good thing in terms of having females in senior positions.
Slide changes content read by speaker.
So just finishing off with some do's and don'ts, and this is very specifically about thinking about moving forward to Athena Swan. So I don't know whether this is any useful or not, or whether this is too specific for you. So what have I found? Don't leave it to one person. And I know the number of women who say, I can't believe how bad Athena Swan has been for my productivity because it's kept me busy for months, and it shouldn't be like that. It's not fair. The data are just so difficult to collect. It takes ages, and I think a lot of people expect really rapid changes. If they just think if only we change a few things, everything is going to be fine, and that doesn't. In our experience, that doesn't seem to be true. But there are some fairly quick wins, and I don't think you should assume everybody's going to be supportive. I think that's an important discussion to be had, because if people aren't supportive, then we need to be thinking about how to get people on board. And I don't think you should assume that HR is going to take charge. We've worked very well with HR, working together, so and that's been a very positive and great relationship to move things forward. But I don't think it's always an HR issue, and I don't think you should give up. But you do feel like giving up quite a lot.
Slide changes content read by speaker.
And so what we have done is we have to keep everybody involved and let people know what we're doing. So there has been an element of top-down decision that we've seen things that are wrong, we've decided to change them, but usually we've had that discussion before we've changed them, and then gone ahead and changed them, perhaps altered it slightly, but let people know why we're doing it. We have made great use of other people's great ideas. So we're quite happy to share our great ideas with people to use them, and we've also quite happily plagiarised other people's ideas. And having another gold department in the university has been great. So we sit on the chemistry Athena committee, and they sit on arts. So we share lots of ideas, including sharing documents and sharing very specific things about, say, if they update their maternity processes, then we ask for a copy, and so on and so forth. So very specifically, if you're thinking about doing Athena Swan, sitting on a judging panel is very good. You can find out what they want. And as I say, getting everybody to do a bit of everything means that by delegation, lots of the responsibility can be spread out, and a lot more people can get involved. We try not to do too much at once. We just do a few things and really make sure we do those things well, rather than being super enthusiastic and not really managing to achieve anything at all. I do think you can get slow and steady progress if you stick at it and keep going.
Slide changes content read by speaker.
So that's what we have about fostering a supportive culture to help all staff and students reach their full potential, which is essentially what Athena is about. It's about fairness, and I think who would not sign up to that? So I think when we keep going back to that, and as I say, that's what we have on our bookmarks, and that we've made it very clear that we're not doing things just for women, but that women who are suffering from bad practices, people are signing up.
Text on screen reads, if you would like to find out more about the dignity, diversity and equality work at the university, please contact Dr James Pelfman-Kay, Equality and Diversity Advisor, email diversity@bournemouth.ac.uk, Facebook Equality and Diversity at BU, Twitter @equality@BU, www.bournemouth.ac.uk/diversity. The Bournemouth University logo is shown on screen.